The warning signs are out there. Evangelicals are feeling threatened. They think that they are being persecuted because their numbers are dropping and they are losing power and popularity. In a desperate attempt to retain influence over social issues, they've been lashing out, using the courts to weaponize their religion in the name of religious freedom. This video will take a look at just a few recent examples of egregious attempts to force conformity to religious beliefs on those of us who do not hold to those beliefs. I will also discuss where I see this going. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. Two of the three examples that I want to focus on today come from my own state of Alabama. Because when it comes to tying religion into politics, Alabama is second only to Mississippi. I'm beginning to wonder if there's a contest out there to see who can cross the line of constitutional boundaries the furthest without consequences. My first example is from Sean McDowell. He posted this article on Twitter, which reads, "Families and churches relinquished control over sex ed to the public schools in the early 1970s. Now, families and churches are reaping the whirlwind. Initially, at least, public schools assumed control over sex ed to stop the spread of sexually transmitted diseases and halt teenage pregnancy. Parents were not doing a good enough job, and public health was at stake, or so we were told." Two problems here. First, when sex ed was first taught in schools, if families and churches indeed relinquished control over sex ed, if families and churches quit talking about sex ed because the school was doing it, that's on them. It certainly isn't up to the school to quit teaching something just because families are no longer doing it at home. You wouldn't ask the schools to quit teaching reading because you prefer to do that at home, would you? Or ask them to stop because your child is no longer reading at home? Second, the article implies that there was no legitimate public health concern that the school was addressing. But there was. This article, calling for comprehensive sex ed in Hawaii, whose school systems still taught abstinence only until 2015, points out some of the health benefits of comprehensive sex ed, primarily lower rates of STDs and teen pregnancy. It says of its Safer Choices program, for every dollar invested in the Safer Choices program, $2.65 was saved in medical and social costs by preventing pregnancy and STIs. The 2014 School Health Policies and Practices study found that 72% of high schools in the United States taught pregnancy prevention, with 76% teaching abstinence as the most effective method to avoid pregnancy, HIV, and other STI. By contrast, Hawaii, with its abstinence-only education, had this experience. Hawaii has one of the lowest rates of condom use among sexually active youth compared with the rest of the nation. The 2013 High School Youth Risk Behavior Survey found that 54% of Hawaii youth did not use a condom during the last sexual intercourse, compared to 41% of youth nationally. It's also interesting that Sean's article makes it sound like comprehensive sex ed became a thing in the 70s and was implemented nationwide at that time. As you see, it took until 2015 to reach Hawaii. Sex ed programs actually began in schools in the 1940s. In 1953, before the sexual revolution, it was in American high schools. Conservative backlash of the programs began in the 1960s. Public school mandates have expanded, however, to recommending non-vaginal sex, then to tolerance for same-sex sex, active affirming of same-sex relations as virtually normal, and finally to the affirmation of transgender identities. Seriously? Are there really sex ed programs in schools advocating for certain types of sex or positions? It's been a while since I was in school, but somehow I can't really believe that this is what is being taught, as it has no bearing on sexual health. I think the author is confusing saying something is okay with advocating for it. An odd position to take, considering that most believers' stance on biblical slavery is that God didn't condone slavery, He just didn't try to stop it either, and that's okay. But somehow, the school saying that different sexual preferences is advocating for different sexual preferences. If it is, then the Bible advocates for slavery. But non vaginal sex? Why does this author think that all sex must be vaginal sex? I'm guessing he just hasn't tried anything else because he thinks it's icky. That's fine, he doesn't have to participate. But why does he think that his preferences have to be the only ones allowed? Even the Bible has nothing to say about sex having to be vaginal. It is silent on oral sex or anal sex for a consenting man or woman. So why is Scott Yanner, the author of this article, adding this to the Bible? Doesn't the Bible say something about this? David Ayers, After the Revolution, Sex and the Single Evangelical, catalogs the loss of authority over sexual matters among Christian churches. Ayers, a sociologist at Grove City College, slices survey data to show that most evangelicals and all varieties of Christians have increasingly adopted worldly attitudes and practices on issues related to sex and sexuality. As attitudes change, so do behaviors. Nearly 60% of evangelicals aged 23 to 32 now have had more than 3 sexual partners. Numbers still lower than other religious traditions, but still very high. White evangelicals are more likely, over time, to embrace same sex marriage and to bless same sex relationships than in the past. Why white evangelicals? Is the statistic not similar for Black, Asian, or Latino evangelicals? Or is this just all about white people because that's all these people really care about, white people? Ayers also shows evangelicals engage in more oral sex, and over 50% have cohabited with a member of the opposite sex by age 28. 52% of evangelical females have cohabited by age 28, while 64% of those without religion have. That evangelicals are 12% better than atheists is not an encouraging development. And how many males have cohabited? Why no figures on them? Or is this just about controlling women? Maybe he figures that if he controls the women, then the men have no choice but to go along. Because, men have never forced themselves on women now, have they? Next, I thought believers didn't claim to be better people. What happened to "we aren't perfect, we're just forgiven" as your excuse for why believers behave pretty much the same way as unbelievers? Yet here they are, lamenting that they are no better than anyone else. Was that the real point of getting saved, so that you can be better than the unsaved? It's noteworthy that the parts of this country that are more highly religious have more teen pregnancy and more STDs than areas of lower religiosity. This has been directly linked to sex ed. When sex ed is comprehensive, we see less of these social problems. Thus, sex ed isn't encouraging sexual behavior, but encouraging precaution when engaging in sexual behavior. At its deepest level, guarding against worldly influences means wresting back from public schools the authority to educate children in all the deepest questions of human life. American public schools are based on the assumption that the public raises children, and only after parents and churches deferred to the public schools, generally, did they cede the duty of sex ed to schools. Now that the full radicalism of that sex ed is apparent, Christians must act accordingly and walk away from the schools that have usurped parental duties. Church communities must commit themselves to providing opportunities for genuinely Christian education, either in the form of financial help or in assisting homeschoolers, or in helping to build countercultural Christian schools. Only when parents and churches take back the whole duty of education can we expect future marriageable young people to arise to lead the future church. The Christian sexual ethics crisis is the opportunity to leave an enduring mark on our decadent age. And this is what I see as the biggest issue. Kids who hear in school that it's okay to be gay don't believe the hate preachers who tell them otherwise. Good for them. If churchgoers are increasingly adopting worldly views, this is not the fault of the public school system. If preachers in their pulpits say one thing and the school says another, and the churchgoers are believing the school and not the preacher, your problem isn't the school. The church has a serious credibility problem. The reasons for it are numerous. The most egregious are the sex and abuse scandals within the church. It doesn't matter what church, Catholic or Protestant, and pick any denomination, and you can find the scandals. Why would anyone believe a preacher who talks about the love of God on one side of his mouth while he's abusing kids in the church or his own family on the other? Second, the church offers no reason to believe them. I have several friends that were asked to leave church or Sunday school as children for asking too many questions. I have never heard of anyone being removed from a school class for asking too many questions. They might be asked to discuss their questions after class if the questions don't elicit information that's helpful to the entire class, or possibly they're taking up too much class time. But you don't remove the student for wanting more information. The church, on the other hand, expects you to believe what they say on faith, not because it is reasonable or truthful. It is truth because we believe it to be so. This isn't a foundation for truth. If the young generation isn't buying it, then you haven't found a way to sell it. Next, and most important, you wouldn't expect the school to stop teaching other subjects that disagree with your Bible now, would you? I mean, suppose your child is learning about Egyptian history and asks where the Exodus fits into the history of Egypt. The teacher rightfully says that there is insufficient historical evidence to support such an event. The teacher has not contradicted your religion. The teacher didn't say that it didn't happen, just that it isn't included in history class because there is insufficient evidence to support it. If your child no longer believes that Exodus was a historical event, despite your preacher saying otherwise, are you going to call the school and ask that they quit teaching the history of Egypt? Of course not. So why, if the sex ed teaching is contrary to what you preach, would you expect the school to change what they teach to fit your belief system? What if your child's teacher was gay and your religion says that that is immoral? Do you expect the school to fire the teacher to conform to your religion? You might. This was a big controversy when I was in high school, whether or not gay teachers should be allowed in classrooms. And the church lost, and rightfully so. There is no secular reason to keep gay teachers out of classrooms, just as there is no secular reason to quit teaching sex ed or to change sex ed to an abstinence-only program. Expecting a secular institution to conform to your religion is as ridiculous as expecting another religion to do so, or expecting a Republican to pass an intelligence test. Or a few Halloween examples, expecting someone to turn into a vampire at a full moon, expecting stoners to give away their expensive edibles to trick-or-treaters, or expecting a zombie to try and suck your blood. Even if you won this battle, you set your kids up to lose the war, which is exactly what we see happening. If you get the school to teach only what you want your kids to hear, like by sending them to private schools or homeschooling them, eventually they will get out into the real world and discover it for themselves. And now they face the dilemma of what do they believe in light of what they discover without your guiding influence, which is part of why young adults are leaving the church in droves. The church's stance, particularly in the area of sex, has rendered the church irrelevant. The church claims that gay marriage is wrong. Why? Just because we say so. But young adults have discovered that there is nothing harmful about it. There is no reason to proclaim it immoral. Further, your kids have gay friends that your church condemns for being the way they are. Not for anything that they did, but just for being the way that they are. And yes, this gives them reason to question your credibility. Progressive churches that have embraced the LGBTQ community fare much better. But of course, they interpret the Bible differently or throw out inerrancy, two things that Sean would not be willing to do. So should, as the author of this article wants, the church be able to wrestle back from the public schools the authority to educate children in all the deepest questions of human life? No, because that isn't the church's place to have authority over government schools. Why would you expect the school to do the job of your church? If your pastor can't convince your young that your religion is right, why would you expect the government to do it for you? Are you going to ask the government to supply teachers for your churches to preach for you, as you seem to be so ineffective at it? The second thing I want to look at is comments from Steve Marshall, the Attorney General for the state of Alabama, who wants to criminalize giving money to charities if that charity assists a woman in traveling to get an abortion. If you had asked me about this a month ago, I would have said that that could never happen. Now, I'm not so sure. Here's Farron Cousins of Ring of Fire, who lays out the issue for us.
Of a woman from Louisiana, where they have an abortion ban, who had to travel to New York in order to get an abortion because she found out when she was 10 weeks along with her pregnancy that her fetus had developed without a skull. And without a skull, it's not going to live. So you need to terminate this pregnancy. Well, her state wouldn't let her do it. So she had to travel to New York. People from around the country donated money so that she would be able to do this. And she had to make that very difficult and painful decision. She wanted a baby, but the baby was developing without a skull and was going to die. So the state of Alabama, after obviously seeing everybody around the country pour money into this and pour money into other campaigns for women to be able to leave the state to go get abortions, the state of Alabama said, now hold up, folks. While it may not be illegal to leave our state, even though this didn't happen in Alabama, it may not be illegal to leave our state under our abortion ban to go get an abortion, we may actually start prosecuting people who pay or who donate to causes or who run organizations and charities to give money to women to leave states to have abortions. So here is what Alabama's ass-backwards Republican Attorney General Steve Marshall said recently during a radio interview. There's no doubt this is a criminal law and general principles would apply. Provisions related to accessory liability, provisions related to conspiracy would have applicability involving this particular act passed by the legislature. If someone was promoting themselves out as a funder of abortions out of state, that is potentially criminal actionable for us. If there are groups promoting this as part of their services, we will be taking a look at that. There is nothing about the law that restricts any individual from driving across state lines and seeking an abortion in another place. However, I would say that if an individual held themselves out as an entity or a group that is using funds that they're able to raise to facilitate those visits, then that's something that we're going to look at closely.
My first reaction to this would be to say Alabama would have no jurisdiction here. If a woman in Louisiana has an abortion in New York, why is the AG of Alabama trying to prevent this? Why is this of any concern to him? No citizen of Alabama has been affected. Even if the woman was from Alabama and went to New York for an abortion, this should still be of no concern to Alabama. After all, if I traveled to New York and was murdered, If the perpetrator was caught, he would be tried in New York, and Alabama would have no interest in the case. The AG has no jurisdiction to prosecute crimes that occur in New York. The problem is that the real root of this issue is religion. How do I know? Because Marshall isn't trying to do this for any other area of law. For example, there is no lottery in Alabama. Selling lottery tickets is illegal in Alabama. If I give money to someone to go buy a lottery ticket in Tennessee, the AG of Alabama won't care. He's not going to pass a law making it illegal to give money for people to buy lottery tickets in another state. Weed is illegal in Alabama. If I set up a charity to send people to a state where weed is legal to address health issues, Marshall wouldn't give a rat's ass about it. But if I give money to a charity that helps women get abortions, particularly medically necessary abortions, like this one, now he wants to prosecute me. Because this isn't about protecting the interests of the citizens of Alabama, which is what the AG's job is. It's about controlling women and advancing a religious ideology. And because I do not hold to that religious ideology, this is an infringement on my constitutional rights against the government establishing a religion. Unfortunately, with the current Supreme Court, it is unlikely that such a law would be found to be in violation of the Constitution, even though it quite clearly is. It doesn't meet the test for having a secular purpose. But unfortunately, this is where we find ourselves when our Supreme Court has weaponized religious freedom. But not all religious freedom, only religious freedom for evangelical Christians. Finally, I want everyone who hasn't already seen it to see what a racist senator I have. One reporter called his remarks reminiscent of Bull Connor. For those of you too young to remember, or didn't hear about it in history class, goodness, events in my own lifetime are now part of history class. Okay. Or you may have been deprived of learning about Bull Connor because that is too woke for your school system. Bull Connor was the Commissioner of Public Safety for the city of Birmingham in the 1950s. He was commissioner for more than 2 decades. As commissioner, he had control of both the police and the fire department. His tactics of using dogs and fire hoses against civil rights protesters, including children in a student march, drew worldwide attention. He was a white supremacist. To get rid of him, the city voted to change the form of government from 3 commissioners to a mayor and city council. Connor ran for mayor, but lost. He tried to retain power through the courts, but the Alabama Supreme Court ruled against him. How bad was Connor? When Freedom Riders came to Birmingham for a protest, he held police back for 30 minutes to allow the Klan to beat them and burn their bus. Now, back to Tuberville. This is what Tuberville had to say at a Trump rally.
They want crime because they want to take over what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparation because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. Bullshit. They are not owed that.
I don't even know what to say about that. Fortunately, former Representative Bakari Sellers does. Let's hear his take.
Tommy Tuberville can go to hell. And let me tell you why. The fact is, he made tens of millions of dollars off unpaid black men as a football coach. He literally has the stature he has because people went out there and assumed the risk and incurred the risk of concussions, playing hard and everything. And then for him to give these racist tropes, I mean, it infuriates me. But this is a large swath of the Republican Party that they have to deal with that they've never done.
Yeah, I mean, they just flat out, he talking about black people. He should man up and say it. American descendants of slaves do deserve reparations in this country. They absolutely do. But for him to equate a whole group of people as being criminal, you know what's criminal? Allowing people to languish in poverty, not supporting policies that will lift people up. That is what's criminal.
Yes, that. Tuberville just took office in 2021. He's not up for re-election until 2027. Hopefully, this is enough to get him out of office. It should be. What makes me want to cry is I know that it isn't. If he is on the ballot in 2027, it is highly unlikely that any Democrat could beat him. If Jesus came back and ran for Senate as a Democrat in Alabama, Jesus would lose. I live in a place where if you begin your remarks with, "The Bible says," people will believe whatever comes out of your mouth next. I joined a political group of women Democrats in my area, but quit because they have a Christian devotional at every meeting. I didn't join to go to church. I joined to talk politics. But where I live, religion is intertwined with everything. I don't want to live in a theocracy. I don't want white men telling me what I can do with my body, what health care I can and cannot have, and what school children can be taught about sex based on what their religious views are, what charities I can donate to based on their religious views. Religion has no place in government. Hell, the believers can't agree on what their God wants, and yet they want to dictate their religious beliefs into our laws. We need a firm wall of separation between church and state. Any that disagree, like Steve Marshall, Sean McDowell, and Senator Tommy Tuberville, don't deserve to be in positions of power. They don't have your best interests in mind, only their own. Because let's face it, who benefits from laws that force this religion on us? It's white men, like McDowell, Tuberville, and Marshall. Today's leaders, tomorrow's commanders. Live your life.